We're going to talk about auditing ERP to start with. What I want to try to do is not have an overwhelming amount of material today, followed by an overwhelming amount of material, later tonight. So I'd like to just kind of parse it and have some of the information now. Somebody has their mic open. I'd like to avoid muting everyone. So if you'll check and make sure your mic is muted, please. When you're talking about ERP controls, internal controls to a certain extent are the same. You're obviously trying to monitor assets, especially the safeguarding of assets. In the case of ERP, you've got a lot of sensitive information that's potentially exposed to the public, and you're trying to protect it with internal controls. You're trying to prevent fraud. You're trying to detect fraud. You're trying to minimize errors. In the case of ERP, what you're trying to do is minimize errors that potentially come from the system and source from the system or are put into the system. You're looking for the reliability of the accounting data. What used to happen once upon a time was that it was easier to separate the IT controls from the financial controls, for example. It's harder and harder to do that now because everything is intertwined so closely together that basically to say that you have good IT controls, to say that you have bad IT controls, but that you have good financial controls is really nonsensical. It's important to note that management uses these internal control policies to provide reasonable assurance. That's all they're able to provide. They cannot provide certainty. So when management engages IT auditors to come in and look at the IT controls, they're not able to get absolute surety. They're at best trying to get just some reasonable assurance that it's accurate, complete, and all that stuff. Here, we have financial reporting, operations, stuff like that. All of you should know, if you haven't taken audit, you probably have come across this anyway, that an unqualified audit report basically means you have a clean bill of health from the auditors. This is also true if you have an IT audit. If you have an IT audit and you get an unqualified audit report, that means that your IT infrastructure, the backup infrastructure, the encryption, the firewall rule set, the governance is such that that your system's output can be trusted. A couple of little regulatory things here. Sarbanes-Oxley in 2002 requires management to basically bluntly establish, document, and maintain internal controls and procedures over financial reporting. They're required to audit the effectiveness of internal controls over financial reporting. So they have to make sure that an audit of the internal controls over financial reporting, as it's linked, of course, to IT, that pretty much falls within the purview of having to worry about that too. You have to assess the deficiencies to determine the effectiveness of the IT control, the internal controls over financial reporting. PCAOB, or PCAOB, is a private sector nonprofit organization. It oversees basically the auditor's public accounting firms. And it tries to, this is kind of the post-Enron, we don't trust accounting firms anymore. We have to have a private sector nonprofit organization sitting over them. Auditing standard number 5 basically states, and it's under PCAOB, that the objective of an audit of internal controls over financial reporting is to express an opinion on the effectiveness of the company's internal controls. What you are forced to do is you're forced to make a call on two different things. First, you have to make a call about the design of the controls and whether the design of the controls is sound. Okay? And then after you make a call on the design of the controls, then you have to make a call on the effectiveness. We're talking about the auditors here. A company can have internal controls that are very, very well designed, but they're not effective because no one's doing them. In other words, they're effectively designed, they're just not being effectively done. And you vice versa. You can have something that's being effectively done, but the design of it is so poor that there's really no sense in even entertaining the idea of having it. Claire, I see your deal here. During the break, we'll go ahead and handle the rest of the questions. Let's see. Adam, do you have a mic today? Okay, just call me on my cell. You have a cell phone, right? Call me. I'll be waiting for your call. I guess this is a good time to put my number here since I must not be on everybody's speed dial. So if you don't have a mic, this is how we can communicate. Hey, you there?
Yeah.
Good. You might get a little bit of feedback, a little loop back, but this is one of the problems of not having a microphone. I have struggled with the registrar to please put minimum requirements on microphones and laptops, and you'll see that it's had no effect. As a matter of fact, the registrar doesn't even reveal to you that this course has more than just a Tuesday component, so it's frustrating on my part. Talk to me about the difference between the design of internal controls and the effectiveness of internal controls.
Well, when you're coming up with a process, it's pretty easy to think your way through how to document or what might be appropriate, but once something's in practice, you may find that what you put in place is insufficient or, maybe overkill even.
Since we were talking so much about the Titanic last Tuesday, why don't you give me an example of a design flaw when you're trying to evacuate a ship? What would be an example of a badly designed control to evacuate a ship?
Sufficient lifeboats.
Yeah, that'd be. How about lifeboats that sink when they're put in the water?
Or that.
What if the lifeboats?
That can't take cold water and ice.
Yeah, if any of y'all have taken, if anybody has taken cruises recently, I believe they're fully encased now. I think they don't even have open tops anymore. They're like completely sealed, which is kind of interesting. So in theory, they could capsize and you wouldn't sink because obviously you're not upside down in the water. What would be an example? Let's assume the lifeboats are perfectly designed. What's an example of that control of having well-designed lifeboats being ineffectively operated?
Try to board people in a certain order or by cabin or something in an emergency might be having an insufficient plan for that instead of loading by who's available, getting the boats full, however many people, 60 people to a boat, and then just set it out depending, no matter who's in what cabin or what class.
Yeah, a classic example would be nobody knows how to lower the lifeboats, right?
Oh, yeah.
If nobody knows how to lower the lifeboats, does the design of the lifeboats matter? No. It doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't really matter. Hey, I appreciate you piping in. Thank you. I know it's difficult. Thanks. Let's see. Zora, do you have a mic today?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you for piping in. So let's keep revisiting this idea of design versus effectiveness. Let's say, give me an example of a badly designed control for backing up a company's information at the end of the day.
Like no designing any segregation of duty.
Ooh, that's really good. That's really good. Not adequately segregating the duties associated with backup.
Yes.
Yeah, because in theory, couldn't I steal money? Couldn't I steal money and then delete those lines from the database and then back that up with those lines missing?
That's right.
Is that the way you would do it? How would you steal money, Zora?
I haven't thought about it.
Well, that's a start, right? Fraud 101, that's a start at least on how you do it, right? Take the money, take out the records, and then back that up. And
yeah.
So obviously you want the person that is backing up to not have any financial stake in the data that's in the database, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So give me an idea of it being ineffective. So let's say it's designed well with good segregation of duties. Give me an example of where everything's designed right, but it's ineffective. Mm-hmm.
So maybe the person who is running the system does not know perfectly how to run the system, how to do, for example, the backup, or they'll look at the logs, or it has not been trained very well to use the system.
Man, that's a really good answer. That's a really good answer. So if you come into my company and I tell you, you're going to ask me how many people can perform a backup of the company data. If I point to 5 people, are you going to pick the person you want, or are you going to let me pick the person I want, and they'll show you how the backup's done?
I will pick up.
Very good. Very good. Zora, you are going to be a good crook one day. I mean, a good auditor one day. Thank you.
I hope so. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, a couple of different things here. Let's talk about the integrated audit. The integrated audit really has 2 perspectives. One perspective is that an integrated audit means that you look at 2 things. One thing you do is you focus on balances. Let me go ahead and do this. Do you see what I'm highlighting? Can you see what I'm highlighting repeatedly over and over again? I've got an idea. Let's change the color and highlight it. Have you noticed how much emphasis I've put on balances? That's because substantive testing is designed to detect errors in balances. Isn't this typically what we think of when we think of accounting? Is the balance right? You know, is the amount that's on the books right? Isn't this typically kind of what we talk about? We talk about, thank you. It's good not talking into just a tube here. This is what we typically think of, right, when we think about testing. And substantive testing, if you're doing substantive testing around an IT system, someone should be pointing to a balance and saying, okay, here's the balance of accounts receivables. Let's go backwards from here and let's identify all the controls in the IT system that support that balance being right. Okay? And this is one of the things we're looking at with substantive testing. Okay? When we're looking at the testing of internal controls, we're not looking at whether the balance is right. What we're focused on is the control effective. Okay? We're looking at, is the control effective? In other words, this is not the same as substantive testing where we're looking at the balances. Both are important. It's not like one's important and the other one isn't. But what we're focused on is different. We're focusing whether the control is effective. We can have an internal control that is effective, right? It's being done properly by the right person and all that stuff, and we can still get a bad balance because maybe it's pulling in the wrong table, right? Maybe it's pulling in something they thought was right, and it's the absolute wrong table to pull in and create the accounts receivable. So the focus of these 2 is very different. That's one perspective of the integrated audit. The other perspective of an integrated audit is that you have different distinct components to the audit. You have the financial auditing, right, which looks at the design and the effectiveness of the controls that safeguard information on the financial statements and other disclosures. You have operational auditing. Operational auditing is looking at safe and effective and efficient operations. And that's all it's looking at. And then you have the IT audit, where you're looking at the design and the effectiveness of the controls that safeguard accurate, reliable, and secure IT operations of the business. All 3 of these are important, and all 3 of them have to be handled, somewhat differently. There's really the problem we've had traditionally is that the people that do one don't do the other. Stacy, do you mind activating your mic right quick?
I'm here.
Hey, Stacy, you sound loud and clear. So, have you had any contact with any of these 3 types of auditing?
Yeah, financial auditing.
Okay. Give me an example at ExxonMobil of operational auditing.
Of operational, you said?
Yeah.
I guess for, what was the company you said? I'm sorry.
Exxon.
I guess the way that for receiving shipments of things and like the transaction that would occur related to that would be part of their operation. So any kind of financial interaction that occurs within their operation, such as receiving or sending out any inventory.
Okay, that's a fair answer. Let me take you down a story train. do they not transport oil on oil tankers?
They do.
So an example of a financial audit of an oil tanker, because they do that, they actually do audits of tankers while they're in transit, consider it like work in process or oil, gasoline in process. An example of a financial audit of a tanker would be they claim, right, they claim that there's a certain value of petroleum on that oil tanker. And a financial audit with that would be, you know, someone actually goes out to the ship or remotely checks to see if the tonnage of barrels that's in the ship is actually there, right?
Yes.
What about if you're an auditor and you go out there and check to make sure everyone who has access to the bridge has been security checked and has a current commercial license to be on that ship and steering that ship around? Would that, which one of these audits, which one of these types of auditing would that be?
Operational.
Very good. What about that all the data that's collected in transit in terms of navigation and heading and speed is being properly backed up and being sent via satellite to home base to be stored?
That would be IT, systemic data.
Very good, very good. Before I let you go, one of the things I do want to communicate is, to a certain extent, do you see how these distinctions between these different categories are just artificial? Aren't they? Couldn't you make an argument that all of these potentially can impact the bottom line?
Yes, and they're all related to some degree. I mean, for the business to operate, they need all of them.
Yeah, let's say you have a Yahoo who steers a couple of metric tons of oil into a beach off the coast of France. Do you think that's going to have a financial impact?
Yes.
That's going to have a huge financial impact, right? And yet we call it operational. Let's say that the latest weather that is transmitted out to the ship that's needed for navigation and to avoid a big storm, you know, if that's IT related and they don't get that information, or they get the wrong table, or they, for whatever reason, telecommunications backups fail, if that ship goes down, again, that's going to impact financial. The point I'm making is these distinctions we have between these are somewhat artificial.
Mm-hmm. It's
basically the entire auditing is the same thing, making sure things are right. Making sure things are right to protect everyone that works at the company. You can experience a disaster at a company that makes the company go out of business, and that doesn't serve anyone's purposes. Capiche?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you piping in.
No problem.
All right, let's talk about IT general controls. We're going to revisit IT general controls a little bit later, but I do want to introduce them here at this point. You will notice that IT general controls revolve around change control, information security, and computer operations. These are the pillars that hold up IT infrastructure. Change control, we'll go through these one by one in a minute, but just want to introduce them. Change control, you'll notice here on the left we have application, database, operating system, network, and hardware. Basically, these three pillars of IT general controls safeguard all these things. They safeguard, remember, in three-tier architecture, the applications, the database, they safeguard the operating system, the network, everything. And these general controls, if they have a problem, if you have a problem with computer operations and you lose access to your computer operations, the entire business is impacted. There's really no part of the business that's not impacted. If you have an information security leak, if you lose company information, if you lose intellectual property, which that's, you know, intellectual property belongs to the company and is lost. It's stolen, whatever. Whereas privacy relates to customer information. This is information you've been entrusted with, and through your incompetence or oversight or whatever, you've lost access to it. I can tell you privacy concerns under information security are a bigger deal, because when you lose access to customer information, you get sued because they want to understand why it is you lost access to their information. And then change control basically means everything that is changed in the system, every single thing that changes in the system has to be documented. Okay, everything. There's nothing in the system that can change without documentation. And that includes adding new users, that includes decommissioning and removing users, that includes changing the existing access of users. There's nothing that does not there's nothing that does not encompass under change control. Nick, can you activate your mic right quick? Nick, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you great. So
Okay.
this is something that I get from clients. They'll sit there and tell me, we have some changes that we don't document because they're very minor. They're very, very minor. And what they'll say is that's just a risk that we choose to accept. So for example, the risk of updating to the latest version of a piece of software, would you classify that as change control?
I mean, yeah, I'd say so. It's a change, and somebody has to control it, so I don't know. That may be an overly simplistic way to look at it, but I'd say so.
You're actually a lot closer to where I like to see my auditors be than you would think. Anything that changes, Nick, has to be documented, with the exception of, like, if you add a new user. Do you think that needs to be documented?
I would think so because it is a change, and everything changed.
You are difficult to trick. You are difficult to trick. What about if the change, look at Lydia. What if the change, all right, or I'll see if I can talk you to this. What if the change is done in the test environment? We're not even in production. If we're in the test environment, so why would that bring down the production environment?
I mean, things that happen during testing are still important, so kind of like Stacy said, I mean, has to be the same as production, so yeah, you still have to change, or you'd have to count that too.
You're going to be a good IT auditor if you ever choose to be, because you don't trust nothing from no one.
I really don't, though.
Well, here's the thing. I've had company managements that say, well, we just choose to accept that risk. We just choose to accept that risk. So what do you suppose I put on the audit report? Management has chosen to accept that risk. And then then 3 weeks after I leave, right, when that system breaks in half and no one can reserve on American Airlines, do you think someone might say, where the hell was the IT auditor? Do you think they would?
Yeah. I think somebody would try to put that blame on you in that situation, yeah.
Do you think when Target got breached and they took 11 million credit cards, you think somebody said, hey, where was the IT auditor? You think somebody said that?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody's looking for a scapegoat.
Somebody did say that. They said, where in the world was IT audit? And what they documented in the report was these backdoor accesses that contractors retain to the database are tolerated by management and they accept the risk. Does that take it off you? It takes it off the auditors.
I would say so, yeah.
It takes it off the auditors. You know, hey, they just point to that language in the report and say, you chose to accept this risk, and guess what? Here's that risk. So there's really, again, I appreciate you piping in, that there is no category of change that you should tolerate that does not get documented. It has to be documented. And depending on the severity, it has to be authorized too. So you can't just say I did it and then do it. You have to document it and then get it authorized. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate you piping in, man.
Not a problem. Thank you.
All right. Now let's talk about application controls. Here we're talking about general controls. Now let's talk about application controls. Application controls are explicitly tied to an application. A lot of times they're automated controls or program controls. This is like three-way matches within the application that safeguard the checking of purchase order to bill of lading to invoice before a payment can be made. You'll have like manual controls. Manual controls just across the board are weak. Manual controls are always weaker than program controls, assuming everything's designed adequately, of course. And edit checks. A lot of times application controls try to keep junk from getting into the system. They try to prevent bad information from getting in. So a good example of an edit check would be something that doesn't let you put in a payment that you want to make that's a negative amount. I mean, making a negative amount payment doesn't make any sense. You may need to make a negative entry, but there's no such thing as writing a check or writing some kind of wire that says, hey, here's a negative amount, give me money. Transaction numbers. One of the classic application controls is pre-numbering of everything. Everything has to be pre-numbered. that chronology is something that companies lean on a great deal when they're trying to find what's gone wrong and where things have gone off the tracks. It's very difficult to tell without transaction numbers. I don't want to overdwell on this. These are just examples of application controls. And, you know, basically what they are is limited to, they're basically just limited to the application. Michael, Mr. Padilla, can you pipe in for a second?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you great, man. Thanks for piping in. So going back to our Titanic example, what's an example of a general control versus an application control? What type of control, what kind of control threatens the entire ship and the existence of it, and which are just kind of irritants that are application related?
Whether the amount of lifeboats on the boat might be threatening the whole the boat.
All right,
So
I'll give you some, and you tell me if you think it's a ship general control. You're the captain, right? So you're Captain Padilla of the ship. You're responsible for everyone on that ship. So you tell me if you think this threatens the very existence of the ship or whether it's just an application control. How about the air conditioning going out?
Oh, that's going to be application control.
Okay. What about running out of booze?
Application.
Are you sure? Just kidding. Have you ever seen a riot? No. I'm sorry. I'm in a funny mood after the Stars got waxed last Tuesday. I'm hoping they can turn it around. What about having a double hull? Yeah, Kyle, it was awful. What about a double hull on the ship? You have one hull and then you have another hull outside that hull. So you have two hulls that have to be breached for the ship to sink. Would you consider that as an application control or a general control?
I think that's going to be an application control.
Okay. Well, what are they trying to prevent with two hulls?
From probably prevent sinking of the ship.
Yeah. Is the sinking of a ship pretty serious? Does the sinking of the ship take with it the air conditioning system?
Yeah, so it'll be a general control.
It's a general control. So when you're trying to assess if something's a general control or an application control, what you want to ask yourself is, if this control fails, could the entire company be brought to its knees? So for example, American Airlines. If American Airlines reservation system goes out and they can't take any reservations, do you think that's an existential threat to the company? Could it cease to exist if they don't fix that?
Yes.
Yes. Very, 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 very much so. And they have gone down. Thank y'all for y'all replying. It's nice. It has happened. Some of these airlines have lost access to their reservation systems, especially on the mobile systems, on phones and stuff, and they immediately see a financial hit to it because people don't, they generally aren't going to have the patience to sit around waiting for magic day when the system comes back up. Other things that are not as, that don't really threaten the very existence of the company tend to be application controls. Computer operations. Any kind of any type of computer operations related to the reservation system can threaten the entire company. What if every single credit card number that American Airlines has gets jacked and taken from them underneath information security? Could that threaten the existence of American Airlines? Notice the word could. Yes, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that it could take out, and this happened, by the way, to a company called Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen, basically from one day to the next, after the Enron account was not trustworthy, and they had basically lost their trust, and overnight they almost completely went out of business. And then change control, of course, too. If somebody goes in and is able to willy-nilly make changes to the production environment and bring the application down and everything down, and nobody can get it back up, that's a serious threat to the entire company. So that's the difference between general controls and application controls. We'll revisit general controls in a little bit. Program change controls basically means, let me get this out of the way so I can see. That basically means any kind of change that happens to a program needs to be documented. It's not unusual that you have program changes that are documented prior to development, for example, but they're not authorized. It's really important that program changes, this is software program changes, be authorized, whether you're in the test environment, whatever environment you're in. It's not uncommon for program changes to not be tested prior to moving to production, and this is catastrophic. It has to be working perfectly in test before you migrate to production. And breaking news, even if it's working perfectly in test, that's still not 100% surety that everything's going to be fine in the production environment, but at least you buy some probability, you raise the probability that everything will be fine. Program changes that are not authorized by management prior to moving to production. This is an example where first we had on the second bullet here, not testing, and then maybe we tested, but then they weren't authorized prior to moving to production. Be sure that the people that are doing these authorizations know what they're doing. Something that I used to do on IT audits is ask people, when you authorize this in the test environment, what are you saying? What is the statement that you're making? And it wasn't unusual to hear, well, that just means that we're ready to go. Well, that doesn't technically mean that you've checked anything. So be sure the people that are authorizing this actually know what they're doing. You can never have the same person that developed the change be the one that moves it into production. This is a very, very bad control deficiency, and it's something that's not terribly uncommon in small companies and medium-sized companies. They let the IT people that are developing changes in the test environment be the ones that promote it to the production environment, and that should be two separate, different parties. For any of you that take the CISA exam, or one of my exams for that matter, you should not be talking or thinking about, well, limited resources, can we really afford to have people that are on the production side and the development side? You need to have segregation of duties there. There's been a lot of problems with fraud and a lot of problems with just flat out error when you have the same person doing both. A lot of times insufficient documentation. Companies tend to be very, very bad at documentation. If this is one of your companies, be sure that the documentation gets audited. It's important that there be adequate documentation. Keep in mind that when something breaks in the system, one of the first things you'll be looking at is this documentation to try to find out what in the world just changed. Who is it that made this change so that we can undo the change and hope the system comes back. These are the environments we tend to talk about. We have production, which is pretty well known. Production is the actual source code, the fourth database here. It looks like a database, but it's really an environment. The production database is where actual data exists to run the business. I want to hop to the second one here. Test is where you have a copy of production running in test, and then you're able to look at all the modules working together and interacting together all at once. Then the first one here is the development environment. This is just like application and database programmers, and this tends to be what is called the sandbox, just like what kids play in. And the sandbox, you'll have maybe there's 40 modules that run in production. Well, you'll have those 40 modules running in test, but if you're going to add a 41st module and it talks to 3 or 4 of the modules, you just load a portion of the modules here, make sure that they're working and communicating accurately together, and then you promote it to test with a full copy of production going. The staging environment, I don't tend to over-focus on. The only thing I'll say in this class is that the staging environment, machines don't talk programming language. Machines don't know anything about C++ or Python. They don't know these languages. What happens is in the test environment, once we sign off and authorize that it's good to go and we can promote it in production, the staging environment has something called a compiler, a C-O-M-P-I-L-E-R. And the compiler changes human language over into machine language so the CPU of the system can understand it. And here, of course, you're working with programming languages. There should be a business justification for a program change. If you don't have a business justification or an IT justification, you should not have changes being made just to check what-if scenarios and stuff like this. Companies have a bad habit of sometimes making a program change just to see what that looks like. You need to have some justification on a business or IT level. You need to have an IT manager, management, somewhere in the business area requesting the program change. Don't let IT make changes that they think the business needs. The business needs to be the instigator of these changes. That does not mean IT does not approach the business and say, hey, we've got an idea on how to do this better. Do you want to talk about it? There's nothing wrong with that. but IT should not be making changes in the business area when they really technically don't have business information about it. We talked about that. Yeah, move programs, talked about that. Impact analysis. Nothing that's a really important thing here is to have an impact analysis prior to moving the change to production. Always have a plan B. When you're migrating from the test environment over into production, always have a plan B. These type of IT projects, if they detect that you have a good plan B and you know what you're going to do if this is an utter failure in production, one of the things that happens is that everything's goes pretty well. If the system detects that you don't have a good plan B, it's funny how trouble will stalk you and get you into trouble. So be ready, and when you're on the executive side, ask, I want to see an impact analysis to the business. If this promotion of this change to production is an utter failure, I want to know what we're going to do to recover from it. And be prepared for, ooh, okay, I guess you must know more about this than I thought. You want to schedule it. After testing and sign off of quality assurance, an IT member should not be involved in the change moving to production. We talked about that IT works in the development environment. They might work in the testing environment, but they don't promote to production. That's a different person. You always, every single change that happens in the system has to be documented, and it has to be approved. You can't have just willy-nilly stuff going on. Miss Catherine Bassel, can you pipe in?
Hello?
Hey, Catherine, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. Kind of, I think like everybody else, wishing I could be outside instead of here, but we'll finish a little early today, and that'll help. Let's talk about the firefighter role. Didn't I just beat to death? Didn't I just beat to death that every single change of the system has to be documented and approved? Didn't I just beat that into the ground?
You did.
I did. What about the firefighter role? What do you suppose the use of the firefighter role is for?
If something goes really wrong and you don't have time to go through like the appropriate channels.
It's okay. So let's say that you are comfortably asleep and you're over a certain segment of the business operations, and you get a text or your phone starts ringing at 3 in the morning, and basically your unit is completely down and can do no business on 2 continents, and they're telling you we're going to have to work on this. At that point, at 3 in the morning when you hear that, are you in a super great mood to say, wait a minute, let's start a project, and after 2 weeks, once we find out what's wrong, we'll have the system back up? Or do you want them to use the firefighter role?
You probably want them to use the firefighter role.
Yeah, you would like to go back to sleep. if you're going to be able to sleep, because you're about to have a really long day in front of you, and if they can use the firefighter role to get the system back up and stand the application back up, you want them to do that. Now here's what I want to drive home though. The firefighter role defers the need to document and authorize. It does not remove, because I get into trouble with companies that say, yeah, we didn't have to document that because we used the FF. So if we use the FF, we don't need to document it. That's incorrect. That is incorrect. When you use the firefighter role, what it does is it defers, it pushes out into the future the documentation and the authorization of using this one-time password to basically go in and change stuff. 2 questions before I let you go. Do you suppose the firefighter role is a backdoor entry into the database, or would you prefer that it go through the application and just be like a big giant super user?
You would prefer that it be like a super user.
Yes, very good. That's another thing. You will get people to get confused and they think, well, we put a backdoor into the database and that's what we use as a firefighter role. They can. I'm going to write them up. I'm going to write them up. There should not be any backdoors. Deferred documentation, Claire, means you don't document it now. You document it later. But you have to, everything you would normally do for a program change, you have to do. You just are able to get the change made now in the program before, you don't have to sit down and wait for a bunch of people to look at it, review it, and authorize it. The last thing, Catherine Gore, yes, very, very much so, very much so. Catherine, before I let you go, so put on your hat and you're an information systems auditor. at my company, how many times a year would you be comfortable with me using the firefighter role?
Probably not that many. Probably if you were using it a lot, I would be asking questions.
What's your tolerance? I mean, I don't have a magic answer. I'm just asking. Use your graduate student brain. What's your tolerance per year on the firefighter role?
Maybe like 2.
Okay. I'm going to lower you a little bit. I look at the last 5 years, and if they've used it more than 5 times in the last 5 years, I write them up. Do you think that's too draconian?
Well, I think you would have to examine the nature of the emergencies that made you need to use it in the first place. Because if you're having a lot of emergencies, probably something else is wrong too.
That's true too. That's like, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of the person that called in on one of these talk radio shows, and they kept asking the person that was, this is a real call, by the way, and they said, how do you get blood out of a white shirt? You know, over and over again, I keep getting blood around the neck area and the cuff of my white shirt, and how do you get blood out of there? Does it seem like there's a missing story here? Is the real question at heart here, how are you getting so much blood on your white shirt, right? Oh, listen to you, Kyle. 1990s humor. But yeah, I don't tolerate more than once a year. If it's more than once a year, I'm writing it up and saying this is an improper use of the firefighter role. The firefighter role should not be used more than once a year. If you as an auditor decide you want to tolerate more, fine. For purposes of this class, let's call it 1. Fair?
Okay.
Okay, very good. Thank you for popping in. Okay. These are, let me back up a minute. These are some of the information systems. These are some of the control objectives that we have under IT. One of them is safeguarding assets. We've talked about that. Ensuring the integrity of the operating system. The operating system is really, really important. If you have your laptop and one of your apps is not firing up, let's take your phone. A lot of people are more phone-centric. If you have an app that's not running on your phone, that's not the end of the world. What apps will run if your operating system on your phone fails? Very good. Thank you. None will run. Absolutely nothing will run if the operating system goes out. So if you are paranoid about your operating environment, you want to over-focus on general operating system environments. You want to really, really look at the computer operations center. You want to be sure that your operating system is up. When the operating system is down, everything's down. The sensitive and critical applications, you want to make sure that all input is authorized, it's validated. I'm going to mute everyone. I think somebody's mic's on. You want to make sure all transactions are accurate, all this stuff. I mean, we've talked about this. Make sure you have database integrity. There's different ways you can check with different types of programs to make sure your database is not broken. Something that will break a database is 2 records that are absolutely identical from left to right. Every single column on that row is identical. That will break the application. You need to make sure we don't have a missing component that's a key field. There's different things you can do to check the database integrity. Talk about that. Yes, let's talk about this. The business continuity, the BC and DR plans. One of the things you're looking for is you want to make sure that the company has a good business continuity and disaster recovery plan. It's always interesting to me how companies will have a problem with their disaster recovery, and when they're asked, right, they're asked, hey, what plan do you have? Their plan a lot of times will be very, very weak. They'll have a very, very weak plan. It's really important that this plan be tested. Okay, I want to see a BCDR test that's been done, in the last year, in the last 365 days. If it's been done, if it's a really critical system, I don't think twice a year is that crazy, because you want to make sure that you're able to recover from losing the database. How quickly can you get access to yesterday's version of the database. This is an important subcomponent that a lot of people miss. If you hang with me, we'll take a break here in a few minutes. Have an incident response plan and an incident response team. You need to have people that are ready to go, and you need to drill them on a regular basis. You don't want to wait until there is a disaster to discover that you don't have a good incident response plan. And of course, talk about that. This is an example of COBIT, and COBIT is like GAAP. In the same way that you have generally accepted accounting principles, COBIT 5, which is what we're currently on, it's basically a benchmark. No, that's why it says some. Sarah's asking, are these slides on there? These will be uploaded after, because I want your focus on the screen right now. And this is one of the reasons I encourage you to be on these sessions, because obviously the recording will be put up there, but I want you focused on the screen right now. I don't want you just kind of blindly following what's on there. But COBIT 1, 2, 3, and 4, basically what you see is a widening and a widening of what it covers. Again, this is like, for IT controls, COBIT is like GAAP is to financial controls. And we're going more and more into audit to internal controls. And what we're at now, the current layer we're on now with COBIT 5, is it incorporates all of these other layers, but it also brings in governance. Governance is the idea that you govern your IT infrastructure from end to end, all departments, all units, all business data. That's what enterprise means. That means that's why we have enterprise resource planning. It's the entire enterprise. These are the 5 key principles of COBIT 5. One of them is meeting stakeholder needs. And stakeholders are not just shareholders. Okay? That includes employees, and God save you, that includes customers. Customers are, in many ways, the most important stakeholder of all. Covering the enterprise end-to-end, talk about that. Applying a single integrated framework. Having one framework, one GAAP equivalent, that's what COBIT 5 is, for IT controls. So we don't have like mushing and mixing of different things. And enabling a holistic approach, an approach that basically looks at it end-to-end, every single component. Another thing that's a big player with COBIT 5 is separating governance from management. I'll explain these more here in a second. In meeting stakeholder needs, what we're looking at is we're looking at the ability to have basically all the stakeholders have their needs met, with specific, practical, customized goals within the enterprise. You have enterprise goals, you have IT-related goals, you have enabler goals, but the stakeholder needs sit over all of these. If the stakeholders don't need it, then it's very difficult to justify that it's an enterprise goal. It's very difficult to justify that it's an IT-related goal. There's a hierarchy to this, and the drivers of environment and technology and evolution and stuff are the ones that fuel what the stakeholder needs are. These are some of the key components of a governance system. Principle number 2. I'm not going to over talk about this. All I want to do is just point out that basically what you have is the governance objective of the entire company, the value generation or creation of the company, and you have these different roles and activities. That I don't want to over freak out about this. 3, applying a single integrated framework. Again, this is talking about having relevant standards at a high level that are big enough to overarch across the entire company. You can read this on your own. This is an important one. Separating governance from management. Governance of IT ensures that the stakeholders' needs, conditions are evaluated to determine, balance, agreed upon objectives. And they set the direction for, it's basically the strategic direction of the company. And from an IT perspective, is handled separately from monitoring and compliance based on those objectives. So what you have is you need to separate governance. There you can insert in your mind IT strategic decisions. In other words, like, are we going to go to wireless or are we going to stay wired? Are we going to go to customers put in the entries, or do employees put in the entries? That type of strategic, overarching, holistic policy needs to be set by one group of people. And then management of IT, they don't need to be involved in strategy. That does not mean they don't have input into strategy. That does not mean that they don't potentially rotate into a governance position. But you don't want people who are trying to do what you're doing better now, better, confused with people who are trying to do something completely different than what was being done before. Jordan, can you pipe in right quick? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I was muted a minute ago. Go ahead and try now. Are you there? Jordan, are you there? Let's check. Hang on. I show on my side that you're unmuted. Can you, while you're doing that, Stacy, Holly, can you pipe in?
Yes.
Is this Holly?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. I just make sure that the muting function was working here. Holly, talk to me about the difference between governance and management.
My thought process on it is that governance would be kind of the oversight, and management involved in, making sure the operations comply with the governance. So it's kind of, that's what I would think, is that, like it's saying, it's monitoring, the operations and how the management is directing and making sure they comply.
Let's take something more near and dear to your heart, hopefully near and dear. Do you remember Blockbuster nights?
Yes.
What kind of candy did your parents get you? Or were they cheap? Were they too cheap?
No, I got too much candy probably.
Milk duds. David says he likes milk duds. I want to highlight for you at Blockbuster the difference between governance of IT and management of IT. Did not Blockbuster have an IT system?
I would think so.
Yeah, remember the cards, and they gave, I think they required,
Oh, yeah.
They required a driver's license, and didn't they have a system? Didn't they pull up the system and it showed what you currently had outstanding and all that stuff? They had that, right?
Yeah.
Was the running of that existing system the problem that Blockbuster had? Was Blockbuster doing a bad job of running their existing system?
Well, I don't think they really had a point to where people could stop, like you could just accrue and your expense, the amount that you owe them would just increase, and I don't think they did a good job of making sure people didn't have huge balances on their account.
Should Blockbuster had worried more about their governance or their management of IT? What should they have worried more about?
The management.
Okay, so
well,
what they were doing, they needed to do it better.
Yeah.
Or were they in the completely wrong business?
Well, they should have kept their focus on innovation.
You hit a button. You hit a button, and I woke up. Innovation. Which of these two is in charge of innovation?
Oh, governance?
Governance. Claire, management opens the doors in the morning and tries to make sure that the business is running well. Governance is about the future. Okay? Governance at Blockbuster catastrophically failed the company because governance failed to see what?
What was coming?
And what was coming?
Convenience?
How about digital streaming?
Yeah.
Digital streaming was coming, and they completely, utterly missed it. If Blockbuster had been doing a better job of IT management, that would have meant that the system that they currently had, they would have been better and better at running it. But that wasn't the problem. That wasn't the problem. The problem was governance and a failure of imagination at the governance level. The reason I kind of had you pipe in is the importance of governance cannot be overlooked. The governance at your company, House Incorporated, when you've got your 2 continents running and a couple of $1 billion a month going, you don't need to be focused on IT management. That does not mean IT management is not important. That doesn't mean IT management is not important, but IT governance is equally as important, because you need to make sure that you know where the receiver is going to be and throw it there. You don't need to be worried about what you're currently doing. Governance is future-oriented. Management is current-oriented. That make sense?
Yes.
Okay, and don't have the same people doing it, because people that work in day-to-day management, what they're thinking about is what? Day-to-day.
Yeah.
They're thinking about day-to-day, right?
Yeah.
They may have input. Well, yeah, it can. Now, governance, some companies have governance dispersed throughout the company, so it's not necessarily centralized. And sometimes governance is that intern, right? Sometimes governance is that intern that says, hey, have y'all thought about using social media to market this at Coachella? Right?
Absolutely.
That might be governance in terms of people being short-sighted and not seeing the power of social media and just wanting to do what they've done in the past, just faster. Good to go?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you fine. Is it Jordan?
This is Jordan. I'm just on someone else's mic.
Oh, okay. Hang in there. I'm gonna ask you a question in a minute. Hang in there, okay? I'm gonna keep going.
Okay.
Thank you, Holly.
Yeah.
All right. We talked about that to death. Funny. This, again, separating governance from management. This is just a visual depiction of this. Oh, I do want to back up here. You'll notice that COBIT 5 is not prescriptive. What that means is that COBIT 5 will not tell you what you need to do next. It's not like an algorithm or a decision tree that says if this is true and this is true and this is true, then this is what you need to do next. It's not designed to do that. It's designed to show you what's on the menu, the types of things that are on the menu, and you have to decide on your own. Here's some general controls. We talked about those. Okay, let's take our break. I have got, and Jordan, we'll get back to you. I've got 7:27. Why do we not return at 7? Let's return back at 7:40. 7:40. We'll continue the stream. Hang on, because I managed to leave my water in the kitchen. Hang on. This is what water looks like, just in case you're curious. And I guess some of y'all are thinking that I only lecture in Star Wars shirts, and I guess I kind of do when I'm online. But it is water, just a double check. Okay, let's keep going. Security controls. What you're trying to do with information security controls is you're trying to prevent, obviously, unauthorized access to the information system resources. The resources are not just the information that's in databases. How often a database is backed up is a form of information that's a resource. What type of encryption is used inside the network and outside the network? This is something that needs to be safeguarded. There's an enormous number of categories of things that need to be protected. User IDs, passwords associated with the user IDs. We'll get into more of those later, but don't confuse information security controls with just data associated with the business. It's also the interrelationships, the metadata, the META data, which means data about data inside the system. These are some common deficiencies. A lot of times, access to IT resources are not properly managed. And what happens is everybody can willy-nilly do pretty much everything inside the system without a whole lot of control. And that's, without a business justification, that's something you need to watch out for. Privileges to IT resources are not monitored. There's not a good audit trail of who has access to what. People will use generic accounts. We'll cover generic accounts here in a little bit. But they'll use generic accounts that don't tie them. One of the big key fields in the second bullet is the idea of system accountability. And that means when I go into the system and I make a change to something inside the system, I'm accountable for it. It IDs me as a user ID, and it IDs me through password, which if I have not shared means it is me doing that in the system. You see a lot of improper segregation of duties. Improper SOD is present when setting up user accounts. So the user account may actually have a design flaw in it that allows someone to do more than one role, that do two roles that are not compatible. So the design can be wrong. Sometimes the design is good, but people are still allowed to circumvent the system and do things. Too many super users, system administrators, people with root access. You tend to see a lot of this with information security control weakness. I will tell you, super users, a time of enormous vulnerability to super users is during the implementation of a new system. If there's a system that's being put in new, it is very, very common for super user access to be granted to a lot of the people that are working in the test environment and even the development environment. And this is because a lot of times people don't want to mess. IT support and IT resources don't want to be dedicated to fixing problems in the test environment. So a lot of times an inordinate amount of super users are allowed or tolerated in the test environment. That's a policy question as to whether you should tolerate that or not tolerate that for purposes of testing. What is important to me if I'm auditing is that after implementation of the new system, that these super user accesses from the test environment are removed and properly curtailed down to what they should be. As you can well imagine, a lot of times that doesn't happen, and those super users retain their access to the test environment. Authorization for access to IT resources is not evident, or it's not archived, it's not retained. Basically, the authorization to allow someone to have an increase in their access to the system is not documented, retained. No one knows who authorized what, for what, to who, and from who. Logical access controls. The type of controls that let you have access to the system are called logical access controls. This is contrasted with physical access controls. Physical access controls are exactly what they seem to imply. Locks, at doors, very few windows in a data center, for example, one way in, one way out, except for emergency exits. That's physical access controls. Logical access controls are the purview of digital access via user IDs, via passwords, via biometrics, which means like your retinal scan or your fingerprint, that type of stuff. Authentication says you are who you say you are. Okay, that's different from authorization. Authorization says I am authorized to do that which I wish to do. So authentication tells the system, yes, I'm a current employee at ABC Corp. And if you put in the user ID and the password, and maybe you even have a token, if you provide that which is required to authenticate yourself, you're allowed into the system. That does not mean, though, that you have access to HR data tables and can change everyone's pay at the company. That's an authorization issue. So you can be successfully authenticated, but once you go into the system to actually do something, there's a second layer that has to be passed through, and that's authorization. Two-factor authentication, this is pretty easy to teach. Basically, you see it all the time with an ATM. In an ATM situation, you have to have a token. You have to have a plastic paper token, some kind of token that you put in, and you also have to have a password. You also have multi-factor. That's combining more than two forms of ID. So, for example, multi-factor might be biometric. You have to have a fingerprint, you have to have a token, and you have to have a password, that type of stuff. RSA is a challenge response system. RSA Secure ID is the name of the product, whatever. It basically has a built-in clock and a factory encoded key. And what happens is when you go into the system, let's say, for example, you have a token and you have a password and you have a thumbprint that you have to, after you go in, they may even have another layer that's an RSA secure ID, and that means the system, once you authenticate yourself, will give you a string of 8 numbers. And then you put those numbers into the device that you've been given, and you hit submit, and then it returns back to you a return value that's of 8 digits, for example, and you have a certain amount of time to put those 8 digits back into the system. If you ever work with defense contractors, or if you work with really, really sensitive type stuff, Center for Disease Control, I know, uses RSA. A lot of companies that work with patents and stuff like that will use RSA. It's yet another way to safeguard it. There's a video there. You can watch it on your own time. Biometric we've talked about. Be careful with biometrics. Biometrics will get you sued. Retinal scans. Retinal scans are very, very indicative of a lot of information about your health. So if you are capturing biometric information from retinal scans, you are capturing medical information unwittingly, and it can create a problem for you. That's one of the reasons that a lot of devices and networks use thumbprint, because thumbprint says much, much less about your health situation. There's other types of controls for security, data encryption, firewalls. Again, you're trying to create this concept of defense in depth. That means you don't have just one control and you hope it works. You have encryption, you have firewalls, you have effective authorization. Having defined roles and responsibilities. This is something that that is important, especially when you have people that are moving or transferring or terminating. You can't have effective security, information security, if you don't have effective deprovisioning. Deprovisioning is a fancy way of saying someone leaves the company. And it's not unusual. One of the first tests that an IT auditor will do is they'll say, I want a list from HR of everyone that's been terminated. And then you cross-reference that list to the people who have access to the system, the user IDs that have access to the system. And any kind of people that have been terminated and they retain access to the system is obviously an exception. Password controls, the only thing I'll say about password controls is you want to have 8 characters, at least 8 characters. That's a minimum of 8 characters. Usually what I am looking for, and what most auditors are looking for, is a change every 90 days. There are environments where you have to have your password changed every single time. If you worked in a really, really highly sensitive bioweapons lab, you may have a different password every single time you go in. So, I mean, it just depends on the environment, but generally speaking, minimum requirement is a password change every 90 days, 8 characters with at least 1 number and at least 1 special character. A lot of systems, in addition to that, will request or require that one of the characters, the alphabetic characters, have to be uppercase. So it just depends. You know, if you create password controls that are too tight, what tends to happen is people start just writing them down, or they start writing. I've seen where they write it down and then take a picture of it with their phone. So you got to watch it. If you make the password controls too tight, no one can do anything. It's not ideal. No, it's not ideal. 1, 2, 3, 4 is not ideal. What companies have been getting more and more into, which I think is a really good idea, is they've been going to the password phrase. Let me write that down so you can see it. Password phrase. So instead of having password 89T whatever R53 underscore underscore, instead of having that password, which just yells out, hey, you know, everybody needs to write that down or put it somewhere where they can find it later, they'll have something like the lamb. Let me put it down here. They'll have something like this. The lamb ate grass next to Mary. And you'll notice this is a very complex password. It's very long. It's very complex. You notice that a proper name has an uppercase. So that type of stuff. And you'll notice that that second one, in addition to being complex and difficult to crack, it's very easy to remember, right? So it kind of has the best of both worlds. This is why some companies have gone more to the passphrase instead of the password. I was kind of around when they were talking about passwords. We just didn't think passwords would last this long. Passwords, by this time, we thought would have been, fixed, and we wouldn't have passwords. We'd have, some other method, biometrics only, that kind of stuff. So the password phrase is a lot stronger. Let's see. Make sure that audit trail mechanisms are configured on. It is not unusual for companies to have the audit trail mechanism on their ERP system turned off. One of the reasons they're tempted to do this is because the system will run slightly faster, sometimes much faster. If you have audit trail turned off, have it turned on. And if it's not turned on, there needs to be a really good explanation as to why it's broken, because that's the only reason that you can really tolerate for it being turned off. Anytime you have the audit trail mechanism turned off, the first thing you should assume is the possibility of fraud. Let's talk about computer operations. Computer operations basically are exactly what you would think, things that safeguard and protect against environmental and man-made hazards. Deficiencies a lot of times come with poor job scheduling. It's not unusual for an operations center to have bad job scheduling procedures. They schedule, obviously you don't want to schedule things right at the most busiest time of the day and slow down the network at the busiest time of the day. Insufficient backup and recovery. A really big one that has been growing over time is unmanaged third-party service level agreements. A service level agreement basically is kind of like a report card of minimum performance that is expected of third-party service level providers. So your telecom company, for example, when you buy access to their wireless network through their wireless cellular network, you're expecting a certain amount of service, and there is an SLA associated with that. There's a minimum level of speed and bandwidth that they should be delivering, and you're checking this. If you're not checking it, it's unmanaged, and there's no telling what you're getting or what you're not getting. Companies that don't manage third-party contracts are companies that are usually getting into trouble with them. Poor physical security, not protected. That's not unusual to see that. Let me just put them up here. It's easier. Some controls, examples that you would have at a data center is you have batch computer jobs that are monitored by management. So management doesn't just schedule batch jobs and trust that everything's going to go fine. They actually are monitoring on a daily, hourly, whatever dashboard basis that they're using to check to make sure things are running and not failing to run. Keep in mind that batch jobs that run, let's say for example, a batch jobs that backs up a certain number of tables or something like that. If that fails, that potentially affects downstream processes. It doesn't just fail in isolation. We're looking usually for an ERP database to be backed up at least once a week. There is the potential for data mirroring, so you can process everything more than once at two different sites, and of course that gives you a certain amount of redundancy that if one of the centers goes down, the other one will continue to process data and keep track of what the database should be so you can bring the other one back up. At the same time, usually as a best practice, companies like to back up at least once a week, even whether it's incremental or complete or whatever. It's just a good idea to have a backup and not rely exclusively 100% on data mirroring. Uninterrupted power source. Let's talk about UPS first. That's the first one. UPS basically means that you have a steady stream of electricity going into the data center. Keep in mind that computers do not run on alternating current. They only run on direct current. What that means is that your laptop, when you plug it into the wall, you'll notice the cute little box in between your laptop and the cord socket, and that is a conditioner that changes alternating current to direct current. Computers only run on direct current, so one of the things you want to have is battery backup for all your computers. So if you have a big power outage, you don't want to rely first on the generator, you want to rely first on battery backup. These battery backups will only usually run a data center for like an hour, maybe 2 hours. I mean, that's still a long time. That gives you time to get the diesel generator up and running. Be sure you test all these systems. Test the battery backup. Be sure you test the diesel generator. Ask, when is the last time that the generator was started? You want it started at least once a month. That's my expectation. If they say, well, that's wasteful, or oh, that's this. That's all a great story, but I'm going to write up that the generator is tested only once a year. Therefore, there's a chance that it might not start for a myriad of different reasons related to settling of diesel fuel, temperature changes. Gas goes bad, Matthew. That's very true. Gasoline just goes bad. You can't just leave it in a container forever and ever. In a computer center too, or a data center, you want to minimize the entry and the exit points as much as you can. Of course, you have emergency exits that violate this, but the emergency exits should always be obviously alarmed. You want to monitor entry points and exit points with surveillance cameras. I'm sure many of you have noticed that when we go to Sage and take a test, there's a lot of surveillance cameras monitoring the students while they're taking the test, and then there's a lot of surveillance cameras around the entry and the exit points, looking for people that bring materials in that shouldn't, or people that take materials out that shouldn't. So that's one of the reasons I tell students, just throw everything away, you know. Oh, cool. Interesting. Yeah. If you take my IT audit course, I've got an arrangement to visit a data center now, and it's pretty interesting. A lot of students have never been to a big-time enterprise-level data center. I don't know if it's exciting per se, but it is interesting to actually see these controls in place and see, the different kinds of halon gas they use and stuff. Halon, most places don't use halon gas anymore. It just kind of depends. But it is interesting to take a tour of a data center. In this course, we don't have it incorporated, but we do have it in IT audit. Obviously, you can take a SOC report. We're going to talk about SOC reports here in a second. This is for any IT operations or functions that are outsourced. You might remember a long time ago, SAS 70 Type 1 reports and Type 2. How did you get that tour? The tour we took, the tour that I arranged for this next fall is we're going to take a UNT data center tour, because that way we can just walk over there. Although I would like to do the Facebook tour as well. I've been out to DFW Airport's data center as part of something that was pretty interesting. Oh, okay, you're asking about Facebook. I have no idea. I'm not taking a Facebook tour. Who took the Facebook tour?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hey, did you take the Facebook tour?
Yes, sir.
How'd you arrange it?
The company I work for, Hillwood, I know you're familiar with Hillwood, out in the Alliance area, they actually sold the land to Facebook and have been working with them quite a bit on the infrastructure budgets. And so they just asked everybody at the office who wants to go down and see it, and I was pretty interested after taking your IT audit class, and I was able to go down there and take a tour of the construction. So they don't really have too much going on right now as far as hardware, but the construction's going up, so that was pretty cool. The generators are already out there. They're huge. There's like 18 of them, I think.
Wasn't that IT audit course awesome or not awesome? I'm just playing with you. I'm just playing with you. Talk to me. So what kind of backup do they have? What kind of generators do they have to power that thing if it goes blank?
I'm not sure, but I know there's 19 generators, and each generator is like way bigger than my apartment. So if that tells you anything, I don't know what kind of power is behind them and how often they have to use them, but I know they said that they cycle them multiple times a day to keep the gas fresh, so they don't have to change the gas out too often. Yeah, they usually will put stirrers. They had like these things that stir the gas around and keep it from separating. But that's really fascinating. I'm glad you piped in, because I am curious now about trying to arrange a tour. How long do you think it takes to get from UNT to there? It takes me 25 minutes to get to work every day, and it's only about 5 minutes from my work. So I could honestly talk to the person that made the land sale with Facebook, because they have very close connections, because they're still, like I said, working on the infrastructure together. And I would say it's about a 50% chance that I could get you a class tour.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's take that offline.
Definitely.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for piping in. Peyton is kind of a big deal. People know who he is. Oh, man. Okay. We're talking about the general controls here. Everybody kill their mic. This is some of the, if you have a failure of an IT general control, these are some of the things.
Hey, I wanted to talk to us tonight.
Hang on, I got to mute your mic.
That's what she said.
Okay, everybody's mic's muted now. These are some of the things that you want to look at. If you have a general control failure, as an auditor, as management, as whatever you are, you want to make sure that you want to ask yourself, like on this 5th bullet, you want to ask yourself, how susceptible is this failure? How susceptible does it make us to fraud? Keep in mind that fraud has an enormous amount of media potential. So if you have a fraud-related problem, it's going to draw a lot of attention. You want to make sure that the proximity of the control to the applications and the data. It's one thing to have a general control failure that's somewhat contained. It's another thing to have one that could potentially impact not just that data center, but other data centers. It's just, again, you can read this on your own. This is how you evaluate some of these general control failures. This is some different kinds of outsourcing that can happen. You can outsource an application. A lot of people do this with Amazon Web Services, where they have an application, a business application, and they have AWS run it for them. You can do a business process outsourcing. So you can take an entire business process, like HR, outsource that, and then they run that entire process plus all the applications that directly affect that process. Or you can do an IT outsourcing. This is where you outsource, for example, the maintenance of the hardware. It could be the maintenance of the software as well. I mean, any kind of maintenance type thing, you basically let them run your system for you. It can be costly, and sometimes you can get into trouble with, if you have downtime. This is something that you have to kind of monitor carefully. Let's talk about SOC reports, because that's an important component here. There's 3 different kinds. There's a SOC 1, a SOC 2, and a SOC 3. Keep in mind that these are reports that give you as a company, you're the outsourcer, so you're outsourcing the function to an outsourcee, someone who's now doing it instead of you. And this other company is providing you with a report that gives you some degree of comfort as to, are they doing what you've given them well, and can you rely on these audits that they've commissioned to look at it. Keep in mind that when you have an outsourcee, they're going to have like hundreds of clients, right? They're going to have hundreds of clients, maybe even thousands of clients that they serve. They cannot have thousands of clients coming in and doing an IT audit every year. I mean, it would literally, they'd spend all their time doing audits. So what they tend to do is they'll have like 1, maybe 2 external firms that come in and do the audits, and then these firms will write up a report of how sound their IT systems are, and then what you get is a report, whether it's a SOC 1, 2, or 3, and it says this is what they found. Okay, and a lot of times, there's a lot of governance around this as to, you get to approve the auditors and all this stuff. Each one of these has 2 different types of reports. So there's a SOC 1 Type 1 report. There's a SOC 1 Type 2 report. Likewise, there's a SOC 2 Type 1 report and a SOC 2 Type 2 report, etc. We'll talk about that here in a second. SOX reports are created under the Statement on Standards for Attestation Engagement, SSAE number 16. This replaces SAS 70 Type 1 and SAS 70. SAS basically is not within the purview of what we're talking about here. We're in the SOC world. These are some of the things that a SOC report should contain. Notice the word should. One of the things they should have is management assertion. So this would be the outsourcee's assertion about the fairness of the presentation. The report must identify any controls examined by internal audit, not just external audit. So the report should say this is what the external auditors found, but this is also what our own internal audit has found as well. Any evidence that's obtained, on the 3rd bullet here, any evidence that's obtained in periods prior to the current they're not part of the report, nor do you want them to. In other words, 2 years ago everything was fine is irrelevant. 3 years ago everything was fine is irrelevant. They are a snapshot of what's happened in the most recent audit cycle. It has to have all the exceptions, and it has to have a report on the operating effectiveness of the controls over the period, rather than as a certain date. So it does not make a statement that on this date of the year the controls were working well. They have to do enough testing to say that from this period to that period, from this beginning period to that ending period, the controls seem to be working effectively. So it's not a time, and it's not a report for a certain date. It covers a period of time. Let's talk about SOC 1. SOC 1 replaces basically the traditional SOC. It's focused on financial reporting. Notice how I'm trying to help you. Help me help you. Notice how financial reporting is what it's focused on. Okay. It's similar to SAS 70. The report can be a type 1 or a type 2. A type 1 report involves an examination of the design of the controls. Notice how we beat to death earlier talking about the design of the controls. A type 1 only addresses the design of the controls. Okay? A type 2 also examines the operating effectiveness of the controls over a specific period of time. Let me unmute everybody's mic. And Emily Munoz, could you pipe in for us, please? Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you perfect. Thank you for piping in. Type 1 and Type 2. As a manager or an executive, which would you prefer if you're receiving it from an outsourcee?
Type 2.
Okay. Why?
Because it's like because it includes everything from type 1, doesn't it? So it's like you're getting more.
Okay. Well, let me hold you on the line. Grace, can you pipe in too?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Are all three of us here?
Yes.
Hello?
Hello?
Make a human sound. Is everybody online now?
Yes.
Okay. Type 1. Talk me into why a Type 1 report might have a small advantage over a Type 2. What sound does a small chicken make?
It's cheap.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Do you suspect that a Type 1 that at a very high level only looks at the design might be cheaper?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm here to tell both you ladies that a Type 1 should always be rejected and you should always insist on a Type 2. Have any of y'all ever trained a puppy before?
Yes. Yeah.
You have? How long did it take you to train your puppy? I'm curious.
Potty train?
Mm-hmm.
A month or so.
A month? What did you put under the puppy while the puppy was training?
Treat?
What'd you put?
Like potty training it?
Yeah, what'd you put under its butt while it was training?
Paper? Or...
Like some kind of paper, newspaper, pads?
Yeah.
Puppy pads, newspaper? The world is flat. Very funny. Do you know what I think Type 1 reports are good for? Somebody want to help them what Type 1 reports are good for? Dog training. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. They're good for absolutely nothing. Does that mean that someone might not try to sell you on them and tell you they're a good idea? Ladies, you're online.
Yes.
Yes. Somebody will try to sell you on them. Grace, are you going to listen when they try to sell you?
No.
No, you're going to insist on a what?
Type 2.
SOC 1 Type 2 because it covers what?
Everything. The design and the operating effectiveness.
SOC 1 covers financial reporting. Look at the slide. Financial reporting and type 1 is useless. Type 2 is what you want. Thank you, ladies, for piping in.
You're welcome.
Everybody's tired, I can tell. Hey, you should try teaching. It's even more exhausting. SOC 2, you will notice again, I'm trying to help you here, Jerry. Help me help you. Notice that SOC 2 is non-financial reports, controls, okay? It's non-financial controls. It's related to security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, privacy, all sorts of stuff. We've had too many ladies on tonight. It's time to bring some males in here. Mr. Luna, can you pipe in?
Yeah.
Jose, tell me in your mind, what's more important, financial controls or non-financial controls?
I think they would both be important.
Are you listening to Claire?
What?
Are you listening? Claire piped in both, and then Jerry's typing in trick question. Let me tell you a problem that people will run into when you're working at when you're a partner at a soon-to-be large firm, I'm sure. One of the problems they run into is they tend to overvalue financial controls and they tend to undervalue non-financial controls. What is the third one? It says related to, start reading, related to, can you see the screen?
Oh, you want me to read it out loud?
Please, I love to be read to.
Okay. Related to security, availability, processing integrity.
Stop. Processing integrity, is any financial statement going to have anything right on it if you don't have processing integrity?
No.
Right. So the reason I had you pipe in is don't buy this line of financial controls we need to worry about, more so than non-financial ones. A SOC 1 report is equivalent in importance to a SOC 2 and vice versa. Now, a SOC 2 report, though, Jose, you can accept a Type 1. Can I talk you into that?
Maybe.
Oh. Okay, let's back up. Never, ever, ever, ever accept a Type 1 report. Never accept a Type 1 report. A Type 1 report, trust me, I've looked at what they look at with the Type 1 report. In a lot of times what they do is they just have a couple of interviews with management, and if they kind of hear what they kind of want to hear, they say everything's okay. Okay? So I'm glad you typed in. No type 1s ever. No Type 1 reports ever. Always, SOC 1 report is equivalent to SOC 2, and you always ask for a Type 2 report. So if this helps you remember, let's remember it this way. Who's number one? Jose, who's number one?
Yes, what was that?
Who's number one? Type 2 reports.
Yeah, it's Type 1 and Type 2 in it.
Right. Be careful. Number one is not Type 1. Who's number one? Type 2 reports, and completely ignore Type 1s. Okay?
Good deal.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you popping in.
No problem.
All right. It's similar to, the 2 is similar to the 1, but it's intended for controls that are not specifically financial controls. But again, don't get into this thing. If it's non-financial, we don't need as many resources on it. SOC 2 reports were really kind of driven more by regulations and areas like data privacy, security. Keep in mind, some companies value data privacy and security as much now as anything else they do. It's really important to protect information. So a SOC 2 report, although it covers non-financial controls, is very, very important from that perspective. SOC 3. SOC 3 is nothing but kind of a seal of good housekeeping. Okay? SOC 3, I don't want to over-focus on it other than a SOC 3 is not anything you want to put any reliance on. It's displayed on websites a lot of times, and it's not strong evidence of much. They'll even have Type 1 and Type 2s for a SOC 3. Don't take a SOC 3 seriously. It's basically just a seal of good housekeeping. A couple of different certifications here for individuals who are performing these IT audits at your companies. The one that's most well-known is the CISA. And the CISA basically covers a lot of what we're talking about in this course. I've had a number of people take my courses in the past and take the CISA and have done pretty well. Obviously they still have to study. For those of you that are interested, this fall we're going to actually do the CISA boot camp on campus, and we have the boot camp. I don't know if it's already started. There's one at UTD this spring that's going on. So if you take the If you take the boot camp, it has like an 81% pass rate, and it's a good certification. This is one of the first. I like coupling it up with the CPA because it's it's for most people, it's the only international certification they have, because this is an actual multi-national certification. So if you work overseas and stuff, if you're a CISA, that carries some meaning. The CISM, again, if you're looking at the people who are performing, it's just one exam, Tana. It's just one exam. It's easier than the CPA exam. It's not as hard. If you study, it's easier than the CPA exam. It's just one test. The CISM is more focused on security management as opposed to actually systems auditing. The CGIT, it's going to be like November. Just send me an email around October and I'll get you enrolled. If you join the ISACA student chapter on campus, your out of pocket for the boot camp will be $50. So instead of being $350, it will be $50. So if you're interested, join the ISACA group on chapter on campus, talk to Dr. Curtis, or send me an email and I'll forward it to Dr. Curtis, because it represents an enormous value if you're able to take advantage of that. I've put a lot of money into the student chapter here through ISACA to enable that. So if we use it, we'll get yet even more. Talk about that. Yeah, C-Risk is the newest one they have. It basically is looking at the design, implementation, monitoring and maintenance of systems to control risk. It's very focused on IT risks. This one right here, by the way, is the one that's the most technical. The Certified Information Systems Security Professional is the one that's most technical. I am looking at doing the review course for that one next year, because this is a relatively new one as well. But you know, people say, oh, how much IT do I have to know? I'm confused. Do I have to be a computer science major? Well, you don't have to be a computer science major to sit for the CISSP, the CISSP, but definitely it's the one that's the more technical of these. Right behind this would be the CISA. COBIT 5, we talked about that. We talked about that earlier. GRC, I have it in here because it's something that might come up in a meeting and stuff, but GRC is basically related to assessment of risk and compliance with existing laws. It focuses a lot about, at a high level, at corporate governance. You're looking at the governance to see how well is it directed, administrated, and controlled. You're looking at risk management. You know, to what extent are they looking at the different bad things that can happen and assessing the likelihood that they could go wrong and the impact that they could go wrong. So you're looking for some formalization around that instead of people just saying, yeah, a lot of stuff happens and we're not exactly sure what it is. I don't know who that is. Sorry, my phone blew up. I don't know who that is. If you're a student, you need to chat and tell me, hey, I'm trying to call you. And then compliance, you know, in terms of, you know, do you actually execute those risk mitigation procedures that you have in place? Are you, you know, actually executing those controls, or do they just look really good on paper? You notice here, GRC provides areas of user provisioning, deprovisioning. That's you give a user ID, you take away a user ID. Just basic kind of high-level stuff GRC covers, and it's a subsegment of COBIT. Okay, is everybody with me? If you're still with me and you're not asleep, please text Y. Very funny. Okay, just checking because we need to wake up now because this is the home stretch and we're going to cover a lot of important stuff here in the next 5 minutes, all right? A couple of common problems with ERP installations, okay? One of the problems is default database passwords. Remember we have 3-tier architecture where we have the client boxes and then we have the application boxes and then we have the database server. The database application that runs on the database server has default passwords and that creates quite a problem. Would someone like to activate their mic and tell me how difficult it is to get the default database password to the various different databases like Oracle and Microsoft Dynamics and SAP? How difficult is it to get the default database password?
Not very much.
Not very much is very true. It's basically a Google search away. Password 1, that's funny. It's basically, thank you for piping in. And who is that? Because I want to note your name. Who piped in?
Zora.
Ah, very good. Boy, I don't never recognize your name. I never recognize your accent. You have this beautiful accent, and I never recognize it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, The default database password is very, very easy to get access to. There's all sorts of message boards that have these database passwords. You can Google search them. Again, they're default. That means out of the box, that's what you have. Very dangerous to keep the default database password. You're probably asking yourself now, hey, Lineros, this makes no sense because the system forces them, right? A lot of times, every time the system forces them to change the default database password. You notice that I give you a default password and I force you to change your password, right? The problem is people will triangulate. Triangulate is they will change the default database password. Let's say the default database password is dog. They'll change it to cat, right? And then after they change it to cat, then what will they do that's a really bad thing? Right after they change it from dog to cat. Yes, boy, all of you have an enormous amount of good, bad sin in your heads. You change it back to dog because all the documentation says dog, and you don't want to lift a finger and start changing all that to cat. So the default database, very, very dangerous. Same thing for default application passwords. These applications that you load that feed SAP or Oracle, whatever it is you're running, that's not the database, but that is an application password. It could be Excel, it could be whatever it is you're running. These applications have default application passwords, and people are very lazy about changing them. Any kind of generic user account is a big no-no. A generic user account, generic means I don't know who this is. So you'll see something like all users _3. Well, all users _3 doesn't mean anything. And if anybody has access to the password for all users _3, then basically they can be anonymous in the system. Applications usually have poor security design. Applications are designed to run, right? Applications are designed to run well. They're not designed to be a big hassle to run. And that tends to create kind of an all-open architecture, which can be very weak. So just assume that your applications are going to have weak security, or they have security that you have to proactively exert a lot of effort to be able to take advantage of it. Any kind of remote access security is a problem. I was laughing at this the other day because I was getting access to my computer in my office, and it was almost laughably easy to get access to my computer in my office. I don't think of myself as a grade A hacker in any way, but it was basically the biggest hurdle was my password. So that means if you can, crack the password, if you can socially engineer the password out of somebody, if somebody just happens, if you get the password to a large extent at most companies, you can get access to the remote box. Most people have remote access turned on. Poor patching. A lot of times companies will have they'll have bad policies around patching. They don't patch quickly enough. They don't patch completely. They have a patch that they load into the environment. It fails, and they just ignore it. It's not that uncommon. If you took me for 4100, we talked about SQL injections and SQL injections. Standard query language injections where you're able to take over and get access to the database backdoor. This is not that unusual, even in ERP systems. No change management, where we talked about change management, where everything has to be documented and authorized over and over again. None of this is automatic. This is all manual systems that you have to put into the architecture of the software. It does not force you. What I'm trying to say is SAP and Oracle do not force you to use change management. You have to consciously, proactively use it. There's no auditing tools. There's no automatic auditing tools. So for example, when you fire up SAP, the application, it does not have audit trail turned on. When you fire up Oracle, it does not have audit trails turned on. It'll warn you and let you know and tell you, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Are you crazy? But you can choose to be crazy. It is not forcing you to. Password rigor, we just talked about that with 8 characters and every 90 days, at least one number, uppercase, lowercase, all these things that make us stronger. This rigor is not enforced locally. So a lot of companies, they'll have password rigor at corporate level, and then some satellite office will do something completely different, and that creates a problem. couple of things here. Java. Be very careful with Java. Java is so vulnerable to security problems that a lot of companies deactivate or they basically block the use of Java inside the network. Java is kind of an ActiveX. You don't have to write this down, but it's something that basically can run automatically some functions that you don't want to run automatically. So it can turn into a problem. That means like SAP NetWeaver. SAP NetWeaver runs on Java. That's what you've been using, right, to get access to SAP. I've worked with IT on campus to make sure that it's locked down and all that stuff, but just beware of Java. Especially beware of versions of Java. A lot of times Java will be updated from version 6 to 7 or whatever they happen to be on, and the new version will close a security loophole that the old version does not address. So you want to make sure that your application runs on the latest version of Java and rejects other entries. Consider establishing an actual ERP security operations team. That's not unusual to actually have a team that handles security oriented at the ERP database. It's not time wasted. Any user ID that begins with DBA, be careful. So let's start talking about some of these user IDs in SAP and Oracle that are trouble. DBA users is a problem. DBA users describes all of the users of the database. It basically has everybody that's in the database. Worst of all, it has the hash of the password. So it has the username, the account status, active, inactive. It has other data that's captured about the user, but worst of all, it has the actual password. And the password, in the case of SAP and Oracle, is a pretty unsophisticated hash. On more than one occasion, people have gotten access to the DBA users table and stolen a copy of it. You can put it on a stick if you have a stick that holds enough, and then you have plenty of time to attack that hash. Get access to the password, and then you can go in as that user, and it'll be nice and convenient. You'll know their username, you'll have their password, you'll know if they're active. You can pretty much kind of go to town. Another table that's sensitive is the DBA roles table. It lists all the roles that have been defined in the database. It's a huge target for hackers. Basically, it has what you can do inside the system. And this can be a big deal. When somebody's deciding what kind of role or user they want to adopt or steal in the system, one of the things that's highly attractive, of course, is one that can do a lot in the system. So you can probably by default know that DBA roles table is very sensitive in terms of your administratives. All of the administratives you have in the system, it's really important you lock down access to the DBA roles table, because it's pretty easy to identify people who have admin access if you have access to this table. Privileges, you'll notice kind of a repeating pattern here. The DBA roles privileges has all the privileges that have been granted. The level of access within that table. It's not just the list of tables, is what can they do within a specific table. Once again, like all role-related user IDs, it's a huge target, especially if someone can get access to the DBA roles privileges table and raise the privileges. If I can get access to the perfect example would be someone who's been terminated. If I can get access to an employee user ID that's been terminated, then I can go into the DBA roles privs table, raise their privileges up to an admin, and they wouldn't even know. I mean, if somebody sent an email to someone saying that, hey, your access privileges have changed or something like that, they wouldn't even be there to respond to it. So any kind of change to a DBA role privileges table, you want to make sure it goes out to a number of different people so that everybody gets a chance to see that, hey, something's changed on this table. Notice that we're going from role privileges to system privileges. That's role privileges. This is system privileges. It has all the system privileges, all the telecom communication in terms of what tables you have access to in this continent versus Asia versus, so this across the system, who can traverse through the system and who has access to what through what means and what channels is something that the privs channel will have, that the privs table would have. It's frequently exploited prior to an attack. If you're going to try to execute a really, really successful attack, it's really handy if you can get access to who has access to what via what channels. This can be a really good way to cover your tracks after the attack. Table privileges. Notice that we're going from system roles to system to, system privileges to table privileges. So now we're not talking about the system, now we're talking about a table within the table within the system. This is not as useful. It's good to have if you're a hacker, but again, what you're going to learn from this is what privileges somebody has within a table. Okay, and keep in mind that you might have 4,000 or 5,000 tables that make up one ERP database. But still, what tends to happen to companies is maybe, this is where you get into trouble, they do a really good job of protecting the system privileges, and they do a pretty good job of protecting the role privileges. So they do a good job of these high overarching privileges. They do a good job, and then they do a bad job of protecting the tables, because that's a lot of work. You could have 3,000 tables, 4,000 tables, and who wants to go into all those tables and start granting the appropriate access under the principle of least privilege? So hackers a lot of times will exploit that, and they'll say, well, we know you're not going to focus on 3,000 tables, so this is the table we're going to try to get access to. And you know, if you are able to get access to enough tables, you may as well have access to the database. Links looks at the connections between tables. We're not talking about system privileges. We're talking about links between tables, and you can see to what extent what table is talking to what table. Which table is updating like a domino the other tables. And this can be very useful for a hacker. If they understand the relationship between tables, this greatly helps their ability to execute a successful attack. It helps them knowing what the relationship is between the different tables. And this is something, again, a lot of companies don't pay enough attention in their ERP install at the table level, but the table level is one of these areas that tends to be exploited because companies don't focus on it that much. There are some people that think there's a tsunami of SAP attacks coming, and Oracle for that matter. Whether it's true or untrue, what I want to communicate is that it's real. The threat is real. It's not make-believe or anything like that. The threat is real. If you just having knowledge of where you have problem user IDs and problem tables, just having that knowledge is the first step towards addressing it. And if you don't address it, I can assure you that there's attackers out there that are anxious to look into it. Tsunami. Ask the poor people in Indonesia and Australia. They'll tell you what a tsunami is. It's pretty bad. It's like a huge wave that affects everything. Anybody have any questions? I am stopping for the night. The remainder we'll throw into Thursday, and then we'll have a remainder into Tuesday that'll be much smaller. So Tuesday's area will not be that much, but we'll have something roughly equivalent to this on Saturday related to business intelligence. Does anybody have any questions for me before we sign off for the night?
This last bit of information, will it be